and welcome to another CBTandME video. Today we're going to be talking about intrusive thoughts, and that can be a part of obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, but it doesn't have to be. So we're going to understand today a little bit about intrusive thoughts, understanding what they are, how sort of common they are, and hopefully that's going to also work on some of the shame that people commonly face when they experience these kind of problems. It can be really hard to go forward and talk about them. Just before we start, I also want to say thank you for your patience. I think it's been a little while since my last video. I've been setting up the Instagram account for CBTandME, so hopefully you should be seeing videos on multiple platforms now. Anyway, let's get started, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about this today. So, there we go. Okay, so like I said then, today is looking at intrusive thoughts, obsessions, and OCD. And you can access these videos now on a few different ways. So you can find me on the CBTandME Facebook page. I am also on Instagram now, and I have my YouTube account where my videos are posted. So yeah, hopefully you'll see me on one of those platforms anyway. So just before we start, just to let you know about getting more help, this information video is meant to be sort of helping you, understand sort of common difficulties and provide some general tips and advice. But obviously I can't tailor it to every single difficulty that people might have. So if you want more specific and personal advice, it might be good to speak to your GP or your doctor. They can support you with things like medication, they can tailor their advice to you, and they can also make onward referrals, which might be to something like talking therapy if that would be helpful. For those people in England, you can also find your local IAP service online. IAP stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, and basically they can offer you free psychological therapies under the NHS. So it's well worth having an assessment if you're thinking about getting some support there, and the link is just here. For more urgent matters, let's pretend your GP is closed, it's out of hours, or maybe it's a weekend or bank holiday. You can call your local mental health helpline for some professional support and advice, and that might lead to a referral as well. Every different area has a different helpline, so if you go to this website here, then you'll be able to find your local site. Obviously for emergencies, if you feel you can't keep yourself safe, or if you're worried about a loved one's safety, then the best thing to do is call 999 or go to your local accident and emergency for a place of safety. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about intrusive thoughts. So our thoughts come in different forms. We all think differently as human beings. So I'm going to use this as an example here. If I said to you the word lemon, how would you think of a lemon? So some of us think in words. You might hear the word lemon, or you might see the word lemon like it's written down in your mind. And this one's quite common for me personally. I kind of hear my thoughts like I'm almost talking to myself in my head, like a kind of constant narrative. That's how I think, but everybody thinks differently. This is also common. It's quite easy for some people to visualize images and pictures in their mind, and I can do this too. So if I think of a lemon, I might literally think of a picture of a lemon in my mind and really sort of have that vivid image in my brain. But thoughts can also, intrusions can also come in terms of urges. So maybe the urge to bite into a lemon. They might come in different sensory sensations. So if I said to you, think of a lemon, some people might think of the lemon juice, the sort of sourness. Other people might think of the sort of lemony, citrusy aroma as well, or the feel of the skin. Sorry, that's my dog playing with a bottle in the background. We can also have doubts, which is another common way for intrusion. So, you know, did I really eat that lemon? Did I wash that lemon? Did I leave that lemon on the counter? And some of us also think in moving images, so literally like a kind of video in your mind. So these are all common ways that human beings think. And intrusions and obsessions can take the same forms in our brain. So as an example, it might be that you have an intrusive thought to stick your arm into the path of an oncoming truck. And that intrusion might be literally you hearing it, like you're talking to yourself in your own head. It might be that you can see it like written text. You might be having doubts. What if I stabbed him? Or maybe urges to stab somebody. An intrusive thought can take the form of an urge as well. And further doubts, for example, am I a paedophile? What if I abused someone and I didn't remember it? Strong doubts in the mind. And like we said, we can also think in images and pictures. So it might be that you have an intrusion about yourself pushing someone off a bridge or jumping off a bridge yourself. And you might literally vividly see that in your mind. So these are all the different ways we can have intrusions and intrusive thoughts. So to just give you a bit more detail on intrusive thoughts, intrusive thoughts are persistent doubts, urges, images, thoughts, and words that you might have in your mind again and again. And the key part of an intrusive thought is that it's a thought you don't want to have. You don't want to have this thought, you don't want it to happen. It's the last thing you'd like to happen, and it's usually something that you really disagree with. And that's why it's really distressing for someone to have an intrusive thought. It's the last thing they would ever want to happen or to do. These intrusive thoughts really sort of interrupt you. They just come out of nowhere sometimes. And because it's the last thing you'd like to happen, they can create a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress, a lot of discomfort, sometimes even disgust. And you might feel like it's hard to share your intrusive thoughts with other people because they can make people feel very anxious. They can make people feel like they're a bad person for having these thoughts, or they're worried that having these thoughts means that they're going to do something, or it means something about who they are as a person. And that can make it really hard to open up about intrusive thoughts and OCD, which is one of the reasons I wanted to share this information with you today. It's really key. I want everybody to know that intrusive thoughts are not a reflection of your personality. They're not a reflection of who you are or how good or bad you are as a person. And intrusive thoughts don't mean that you're dangerous. These intrusive thoughts are usually the last thing you'd ever want to have happen or to do. They're unwelcome, and that's why they make you so distressed. So usually it's the things that you care most about that are actually the things you have intrusions about. So I'll give you an example. If you were a very strict Christian, you might have blasphemous intrusive thoughts. If you're somebody who really cares about children, maybe you're a parent or maybe you work with children, you might have thoughts about being a paedophile or abusing children, and not that you want to do it, bear in mind, just worries about those things. If you're very keen to, have a safe house, you might have intrusions about, the safety of your home, about flooding or the oven being on and a fire or a burglar. Whatever you generally care about the most is what you start to get intrusions about, because it's the last thing you would ever want to have happen. So it doesn't mean you're a bad person for having these thoughts. Are these thoughts normal? I get asked this question a lot, and I want everyone to know that intrusive thoughts are normal. In fact, it's a normal part of the human brain and the human experience to have intrusive thoughts. We all get them in some form or another. I'll give you a few examples of my own intrusive thoughts that I've had. I might be in a train station and or on the underground, even in London, and I might be waiting for the train to come, and I look at the track and I just think, I could jump off, I could kill myself, I could jump in front of a truck. I could be at the supermarket and I hate queues or people walking really slowly in front of me. And I might have an intrusive thought, I could just shove you out of the way and push you right now. I've had intrusive thoughts before where, you know, I could just grab my friend's face and give them a really big kiss. I've had intrusions when I'm driving and I might be driving a car and I might be worrying, you know, I could crash the car right now. I could drive into something and kill my whole family. And I've had intrusions before where I might be babysitting a kid and the kid's playing in a different room from everyone else, and I'm playing with the child. And I might have some intrusive thoughts. You know, I'm really worried. What if they think that I'm abusing this child when actually all I'm doing is playing with that child nicely? I've also had intrusive thoughts about worrying about leaving the hair straighteners on and burning the house down. Or did I really lock the front door? These are all common intrusions that I myself have experienced. And you might be sitting there listening to those thinking, well, I've had those too. And most human beings have. They're not that uncommon at all. So we all actually have intrusive thoughts in some form or another. The difference is, though, if somebody who has obsessive compulsive disorder or who struggles with intrusive thoughts, it's their reactions and interpretations of those thoughts that make it a very different experience. So if I had a thought, maybe I'm getting in an argument with my friend and I have a thought, I could just slap my friend on the face. Well, my reaction would probably be, I know I'm never going to do that. I'm not a violent person. That thought doesn't mean anything. And I would just forget about that thought. But if you struggle with intrusive thoughts, then that thought will be a really powerful experience. And they might start to worry, I'm a danger to my friend. I'm a bad person because I had this thought about hurting my friend. Because I thought about it, it means I'm going to do it. And then that creates a lot more anxiety about that thought. And then what happens is generally that person would pay more attention to those thoughts. They start to worry about the fact that they've had those thoughts, and they might start to look out for similar types of thoughts. And then that can really start to affect someone's life and cause them a lot of anxiety. So why do we get these thoughts is a question I get asked a lot. And if you think about it, our brains are creative. Our brains constantly come up with all sorts of random ideas and they constantly link things together. Somebody's brain came up with the idea to put chocolate in milk and make a really nice hot chocolate drink. So sometimes we get creative connections that are really helpful. But sometimes they're random, or sometimes they're unhelpful or worry us. But our brain just comes up with a million different ideas. And our brains also need to consider danger. Our brains are hardwired from evolution, back from caveman times, to think about all the risks and dangers that we might come across. And if it didn't do that, then we wouldn't be alive today as a human race. But the problem is our brain still does that in this day and age. And for example, if we were to walk across a cliff, we might have a thought of jumping off or falling or pushing someone else. And that's our brain's way of realizing a cliff is dangerous, and it's telling you that the cliff is dangerous. Your brains recognize that. But again, the problem is how we interpret that thought. Because if we think, oh, I don't want to fall off a cliff, I'm going to keep on walking and make sure I'm safe, that thought probably won't bother you very much. Whereas if you're really worried, because I've thought about that, it means I'm going to jump off the cliff or I'm going to push my friend off the cliff. That's going to have a very different reaction to you and make you very anxious. So again, we all have these kind of thoughts. It's just how we interpret them and how we react to these thoughts that makes a very big difference. So I want to just hammer this point home a little bit more with this study that I think is just really helpful, to be honest. So there is a reference if people want to, you know, read more and find out more about this. But ultimately, this study, they asked 293 students, none of which had been diagnosed with a mental health problem, what kind of intrusive thoughts have they had? And I think it's very interesting. It just shows how common intrusive thoughts are. So driving into a window or running your car off the road. Again, quite high amount of people have thought about running their car off the road. Hitting animals or pedestrians with their car. Again, about 40 to 50% of people have thought about doing that. Swerving into traffic. Again, 55% of women and 52% of men had that thought. Smashing into objects. Again, 20 to 40%. Slitting your wrist or your throat. About 20% again. Cutting off your own finger. Again, just under 20%. Jumping off a high place. 39% of females and 46% of men said that they had that thought. Fatally pushing a stranger or fatally pushing a friend. Again, we're looking at between 9 and 34% of people having that thought. Jumping in front of a train or a car, we're in the high 20s. Pushing a stranger or a family member in front of a train and a car. Again, we've got 5 to 20% of people having that kind of thought. Hurting strangers or insulting strangers ranges from 18 to 59% of people having that thought. And again, think how many people have had that thought and not acted on it, because 59% of people haven't hurt strangers. So what does that show you? These are just thoughts usually, aren't they? Bumping into people, 37% of females and 43% of males had that thought. Insulting someone from authority, maybe a boss or a policeman, again, 30 to 48%. Insulting your family members, that's in the high 50s to 60s there. Hurting a family member, again, 42% of females and 50% of males on that study said that they had intrusive thoughts about that. Choking a family member or stabbing a family member, again, we're ranging from 6 to 22% of people having that thought. Accidentally leaving the heat on, the oven on, 79% of females having that thought and 66% of males having that thought. That's very high. Having your home unlocked and an intruder or a burglar getting access to your home, 77% of women and 69% of men having that thought. Your taps left on, your home being flooded, 28% of females and 24% of males having that thought. Swearing in public, breaking wind in public, throwing something randomly or causing a public scene. Again, we're in the sort of 30s to 40s here. Causing, oh, sorry, I've done that one. Scratching your car paint or someone else's car paint, probably. 26% of females and 43% of males having those thoughts. So as you can see, it's very common to have thoughts about driving into things, hurting yourself, hurting other people, insulting people, hurting your family or strangers, damage to your home, damage to your property, your home not being safe, doing something embarrassing in public. These are really common intrusive thoughts that most people have. So what else do we have? Breaking a window, 26% of women and 43% of men having that thought. Wrecking something, again, similar numbers. Shoplifting, grabbing money or holding up a bank. We've got there between 6 and 39% of people having those thoughts. Sexual intrusions are also common intrusions. So sex with an unacceptable person, I guess it depends what unacceptable means, but for some people that might be, being sexually promiscuous. It might be having sex with a minor, a dog, an animal, an old person, someone who's vulnerable, whatever you deem unacceptable. 46% of women and 63% of men have had an intrusive thought about having sex with someone unacceptable. Sex with someone in authority, whether that be, again, a manager, a teacher, a boss, a policeman. 36% of females and 63% of men have had an intrusive thought about that. your fly being undone, kissing a boss, or exposing yourself to someone. Again, we've got between 9 to 44% of people having intrusive thoughts about that. Acts against your sexual preference. What that's meaning is basically any sexual act that isn't your normal sexual preference or orientation. So it is common that we might get straight people having sort of thoughts that they might be homosexual, they might be having thoughts that they're a paedophile, or have some other sort of fetish. Anything against someone's normal sexual preference. 19% of females and 20% of males have had a thought like that. Thinking of people naked, either strangers or authority figures. Again, we're looking at the high 42 to 80% of people having those thoughts. Sex in public, again, 49% of women, 78% of men having those intrusive thoughts. A disgusting sex act, and again, it depends what you define as disgusting, but 43% of women have had intrusive thoughts about a disgusting act, and 52% of men. Catching a sexually transmitted disease, whether this is something like AIDS, HIV, STIs, STDs. 60% of females and 43% of males have had intrusions about that. Now we're looking at contamination. So contamination, picking up some sort of germ or virus from doors or from phones, or it could be picking up some sort of bodily fluid or some sort of contaminate, maybe asbestos, for example, or radiation. Again, we're looking at between 18 to 35% of people having intrusions about those. Getting a fatal disease from a stranger or giving a fatal disease to a stranger. Again, we're looking at the 20s here. Just giving everything away, all of your belongings. 52% of females and 43% of men. Removing all dust from the floor and all dust from unseen places. Again, we've got from the high 20s to the 40s there. So you can see these intrusive thoughts can come in lots of different forms. And here we've got, breaking things, stealing. We've got lots of different sexual intrusions, and we've got thoughts about getting diseases or contamination, or also making other people unwell from those things. And again, if your intrusive thought isn't on there, this list isn't an infinite list, is it? There's lots and lots of different intrusive thoughts. These are just some common ones that people did admit to. I think coronavirus is likely to be quite a high intrusion that lots of us are having now, worrying about whether we've taken that and sort of got infected from it, or whether we've passed that on and contaminated other people. There's going to be lots more sort of modern day intrusions that also aren't on this list. Bearing in mind it was done in 1992, this study. But I still think it's relevant. It just shows how common these thoughts are, and the fact that most human beings do have some type of intrusive thoughts, as you can see. So a question I get asked a lot is, if these thoughts are normal, why do they bother me so much? Like I said earlier, it's the interpretation of these thoughts that makes them distressing and hard to ignore. Some people can shrug them off. Other people get really worried about those thoughts, and then they feel a lot more powerful and important, and therefore more significant, and they create a lot of anxiety and distress for people. You might have heard of a clinical term called thought action fusion, or TAF. And this is where we sort of interpret our thoughts to mean something that can give us a lot of anxiety. So because I thought about it, it means it's going to happen. If I say it out loud or I write it down, it's more likely to come true. Because I thought about that happening, it's true. Because I thought it, it means that I'm a bad person. Because I thought it, it's my responsibility to prevent it. Thinking this is just as bad as doing it. Because I thought about this, it means I'm going to do it. If someone has these kinds of interpretations, then a thought isn't just a thought anymore, is it? That thought feels really important. It feels like it's going to happen, or it's a reflection on you somehow. And it can give us a big sort of feeling of responsibility, like we need to do something to stop it, or we need to get rid of these thoughts. And again, that creates a lot more distress. It makes that thought feel a lot more powerful, and it's going to mean that we're paying a lot more attention to that thought than someone that just thinks, oh, it's just a thought, but I'm never going to do that, I'm going to let that thought go. There's a big difference there. Because the person believes the thought's likely to happen, that person feels a strong sense of risk, danger, and anxiety. For some people, it's also really hard to tolerate the doubt. So I'll go back to my personal example here about when I used to straighten my hair. And I used to be really worried, have I left the hair straighteners on? Now, think about it. My brain thinks of a million different things, and my brain does not have space to store every single memory of me switching off my hair straighteners. My brain has other things that are much more important to think about. But as a result, sometimes I can't remember whether I turned it off or didn't turn it off. And it can be really hard to tolerate that doubt of not knowing. Am I sure I turned it off? I can't remember. And that can be really consuming as a doubt. And I know at one point in my life, I was going back in the home to check that I turned it off. I might call my partner to ask him, have the hair straighteners been turned off? I'm really not sure. Now, luckily for me, it wasn't that severe, but it can become severe. We can really grow that sense of anxiety. And what we generally find is that the more we check these things, the more those things are on our mind and the more we worry about them. And then again, the more we check, and it grows and grows until it becomes a really severe thing that we're focused on and preoccupied about. Luckily, it didn't get that bad for me, but it's very easy to happen for people. So the more you act on these thoughts, the more you try and stop these things happening, the more you do what we call a compulsion, which we'll talk more about, or the more you try and mentally stop those thoughts from coming. Maybe you try and block those thoughts out or suppress them. The more thoughts you're generally likely to have, because if you're acting on your thoughts in any way, then those thoughts are going to be more in your mind. You're going to have more attention drawn to those thoughts. You're going to be more vigilant, looking out for those thoughts as well. And again, that's why, although all human beings have intrusive thoughts, if you're worried about them, then you're probably going to be having more of those thoughts. You're going to be having more frequent thoughts and more intense and powerful thoughts, because you're acting on those thoughts and trying to get rid of them. So I just want to do a bit of an experiment now to show you how trying to not think about something is counterproductive, and it actually makes us think about it more. So just have a go at this. Play along with me. So we're going to do a thought suppression, experiment here, where I'm going to ask you not to think about a pink elephant, okay? Try your best not to think about it. You can think about anything else you want, but just try your best to not have that thought, okay? And we're only going to do it for 60 seconds, so it won't be long. If you do think about it, you can count how many times it pops into your head, but then go back to not thinking about it. And I'm just going to count for 60 seconds, and I'm going to be quiet whilst we do this, okay? So we're going to start now. Okay, that's a minute. It always feels longer when you have a minute timed. How was that for you though? Did you think about the pink elephant? Did it pop into your mind? Did it keep popping into your mind? How did it feel if it popped into your mind? Was it frustrating? Was it a bit annoying when it kept popping into your mind? Was it slightly at the back of your mind? Most people tell me that they really try to not think about pink elephant, and actually what I find is people that try the hardest to get rid of the thoughts of the pink elephant are the people that generally tell me that they've had more thoughts of the pink elephant, because it is counterproductive. Other examples might be, when you're in bed and you've got a blocked nose because you've got a cold, and you're trying your best to just concentrate on the sleep and not think about how blocked up your nose is or think about your breathing. But the more you try to not think about your breathing, the more you're thinking about it. And all you can notice is how blocked up your nose is and how breathing feels unnatural now. And then you start to worry, am I even breathing normally? Or if someone tells you, don't think about blinking, and what's the first thing you do? You start to think about blinking, and then you can't even blink normally anymore because you don't know how often you're meant to blink when you're not doing it automatically. Or when people play the game, the don't think about the game that people used to play in high school. And then as soon as you think about the game, you've lost. Well, that just proves, doesn't it? Trying to suppress your thoughts doesn't work because they pop up more usually when you're trying to push something down. And of course, this relates to intrusive thoughts. Generally, we get something a little bit like this, where we tell ourselves to not think about that thought, or try and think about it less. And then we just get more and more frustrated. More of our attention is drawn to that thought. We are very quick to identify as soon as it pops out, and then we get so much stress and frustration and anxiety about that thought popping up. Now let's think about it. Pink elephants aren't a nasty topic to think about, but if you're having thoughts that disturb you or make you really anxious, like maybe you're having violent images or sexual thoughts you don't want, or thoughts of harming yourself or strangers, those thoughts can be even harder when you're trying to push those thoughts away and they keep popping up. That can be really distressing for someone. And like I said, the reason I wanted to show you this is because actually the more we try and push away our thoughts, generally the more of them we get and the more powerful those thoughts get. So generally trying to push these thoughts away isn't a helpful thing to do. So as I said, the more we try to not think of something, the more we think about it and the stronger it feels. And actually it just creates that vicious cycle, and then we've got more attention on those thoughts, they feel more powerful, we get more anxious, we feel like we need to get rid of them because those thoughts are dangerous. And then we might start to believe that they mean something bad about us, like I'm a bad person for having that thought, and our anxiety about the thoughts just grow and grow, and it can really spiral. And some of you might be sitting there thinking, yes, this is exactly what's happening to me. And that's because it's such a common thing. Pushing away our thoughts generally makes it worse. So 2 things I want to just touch on is that thinking alone doesn't cause things to happen. Your action and your intention to actually do it are required. You have to want to act, and you have to then actually act. So, for example, if you think about donating money to charity, that doesn't help the charity. It doesn't make you a good person just thinking about it. You have to actually have the intention to do it and then actually act and do it in order to help that charity. That also applies to negative events. If you're having an intrusive thought about stabbing somebody, that's not enough in itself to stab someone. You have to actually want to stab someone and then actually make yourself get the knife and actually do the act. And those are very different things. There's a very big difference between thinking and acting. And sometimes when we're anxious about our thoughts, we can get that confused. It's also important to remember that just because you've thought about something, it doesn't make it any more less or likely to happen. So, for example, just because I think about winning the lottery doesn't make me any more likely to actually win the lottery. And again, it can be the same for negative events as well. Just because I think about my house burning down and the fact that I left my hair straighteners on doesn't make it any more likely that I actually have left my hair straighteners on. It's just a thought. Having the thought alone doesn't increase the risk. But again, when we're anxious, we can get that mixed up and logic goes out of the window. But let's think about it. If thinking about things alone made them happen, then all the people in the world thinking and wishing for world peace would have made that happen by now. Thinking on its own isn't enough for things to happen or for things to get done. So let's talk a little bit about OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. I feel like we've talked about the O part already. Obsessions is just another word for intrusive thoughts. The only difference is that they can feel very obsessive. So instead of letting go of that intrusive thought, like we said, it can really grab hold of us and feel really powerful and vivid and intense and like it's definitely going to happen. And compulsions are things that we do in response to our intrusive thoughts. Compulsions can be behaviors, things that we actually physically do. So, for example, if you were worried about contamination, you might wash. If you were worried, like me, about your hair straighteners causing a fire, you might go back and turn them off and unplug the straighteners at the mains. But they can also be mental compulsions too. So, for example, trying to replace a thought with a good thought, or trying to wipe away bad thoughts or push them away. They can also be compulsions. They're just mental compulsions, but they're just as harmful. Some people might be avoiding touching things. They might avoid things that feel contaminated, or avoiding things like knives because they're worried they're going to lose control of themselves. They might have to repeat actions a certain amount of times to feel like that intrusive thought isn't going to happen. They might have to do something several times until it feels right. So an example of this might be that you have to clean your sink a number of times until it feels clean. Some people do things a certain order, step by step. It has to be done in that way. They can't deviate from that ritual. They might avoid things that trigger an intrusion. So, for example, if you're really worried about running someone over in your car, you might avoid driving. You might have to have things in a certain order or have things symmetrical. So maybe if one hand touches the laptop, then the other hand has to touch the laptop in the same similar way, or it feels really uncomfortable. Some people repeat movements, or they might do movements really slowly. They might tap things or do other bodily actions. Mentally reassuring themselves that that intrusion isn't going to happen is a mental act again. Checking if you've had a physical or groinal response. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this one. People who have sexual intrusive thoughts may mentally scan their genitals just to see if their genitals have had a physical reaction. Now, when you are anxious, it's very common that your heart beats quickly, isn't it? And that your blood pressure goes up. And that can also affect our genitals. It's been proven that we get genital responses when we're sexually aroused, but we also get them when we're anxious. It's not uncommon. And again, people can misinterpret that. People can think I'm having a tingle or maybe some sort of genital change down there. It means that I am aroused by this thought. And actually, that's not true. You can also notice changes in your genitals when you're anxious because of changes in your blood flow. So just to mention compulsions, this isn't a sort of list on itself. This list could go on and on. A compulsion is basically anything you do, whether it's mental or behavior, in response to an intrusive thought. And our compulsions vary from person to person. So I couldn't write a list of every single compulsion because there are millions of them and they're going to be different for everybody. But I just wanted to explain a little bit about what a compulsion is. So OCD and intrusions, how do we, start to see some change? Well, it is really helpful to start learning that our thoughts are just thoughts and they have no power or influence. If we learn that our thoughts aren't dangerous, then we don't feel such a need to act on them or get rid of those thoughts anymore. We learn that thoughts are just thoughts, they're not facts, they're not truth, it's not going to happen just because I thought it. That's really powerful. And I appreciate that is not something that you can just hear from a YouTube video and suddenly believe. But often people will test that out through behavioural experiments and therapy. And although doing the compulsions, whether it's checking or doing something to stop that thought coming true, although that does provide relief, it does reassure us. What happens is that it maintains the problem. It actually means the more we act on our thoughts, the more our thoughts are on our mind, the more attention we're paying to our thoughts and acting like our thoughts are going to happen and are true. And if we do that, it gives us more anxiety. It also gives us more thoughts. And then we get more intrusions that we have to act on. So compulsions can grow if we act on our thoughts. And the more someone with OCD carries out their compulsions to try and relieve their anxiety, generally what happens is the more anxiety they get, the more intrusions they get, the more doubts and urges they then get, and it's that vicious cycle. And that's why somebody can go from maybe 1 hour washing themselves in a shower to 5 hours a day washing themselves in the shower, because once they start washing themselves in the shower, then they're paying attention to their thoughts about dirtiness, they're paying attention to their feelings of being dirty, and the more attention they pay to feeling dirty, the more they're going to have worries that they're unclean, and they're going to get anxious about that, and then they're going to feel like they need to clean more and more and more. And it just becomes a little bit like an addiction. We need to do more and more and more to get the same relief, and it can quickly spiral out of control. By doing the compulsion, you also miss the opportunity to learn what happens if you don't act on that thought. And often people realize that if they don't act on the thought, if they don't go back and check the hair straighteners like me, for example, then usually we realize that the thing we feared isn't as likely to happen as we initially thought it would be. So just some things for you to think about there. So coping, what do we want to do? Ideally, what we want to do is you will get an intrusive thought, whether that's a doubt, did I turn off the straighteners, whether it's an image, maybe a picture in your mind of something bad happening. Maybe it's an urge, the urge to have everything sort of set up straight, or maybe it's a thought, I'm going to kill my partner. Whatever that intrusion is, it will create anxiety or disgust or distress for you. What normally would happen is someone would react by either trying to mentally suppress that thought, replace that thought, doing a mental compulsion, or doing a behavioural compulsion, which might be avoidance, but it might be doing some sort of compulsive behaviour or ritual. What we want to learn to do instead is not trying to suppress that intrusion, not trying to ignore that intrusion or block it out, but we also don't want to deliberately pay attention to it either, because neither ends would be helpful there. If you think about it, it's a little bit like a spectrum. Trying to block thoughts out or pay them no attention would be the 0. And like we did with the pink elephant, the more we try and not think about something, the more we think about it. So that's not helpful. But equally, what you don't want to do is dwell on that thought and really focus on it and pay it loads of attention, because that's also not helpful, is it? That's going to make you really worried about that thought. So what we want to do instead is letting that thought pop up, because they will. That's what intrusions do. But letting it go on its own accord. We're not going to try and get rid of the thought. We're not going to try and suppress the thought or push it away. But we're not going to try and focus on that thought either. We're just going to notice the thought is there, and we're going to let it go on its own accord. And that takes a lot of time and practice. that will cause you anxiety. And what we want to do is sit with that anxiety without doing a compulsion until that anxiety naturally decreases on its own accord. And by doing that, you'll be learning you don't have to act on your thoughts. You don't have to push away your intrusive thoughts. And maybe that thing that you really feared happening didn't happen. I'll give you an example here. Let's pretend you've got a brand new Mini Cooper, popular car that lots of people like. And it's brand new and they're very expensive. So you're going to be quite anxious about it, aren't you? And like I said, we generally get intrusive thoughts about the things that we care most about. Now, if you've just got a lovely brand new shiny car, then you might have an intrusion. Did I really lock that car? That intrusion might be in the form of a doubt. And that's going to make you nervous, isn't it? If you're going to work, you've left your car and you can't remember whether you locked it or not. Now, if you have severe OCD or you have severe difficulties with intrusive thoughts, most people would pay, however much a Mini Cooper costs to get recovery from their OCD, because it is horrible. It's really debilitating if you've got severe OCD. And I'm not asking you to pay that much amount of money, but you might have to risk it in order to work on your recovery. So instead of, doing that second click or third click or going out into the car park in your lunch break just to check it's there, which, I'm sure we've all done at some point or another, it's letting ourselves tolerate the anxiety, letting ourselves tolerate that intrusion without acting on it. So without double locking our car, triple locking our car, without going to check, just sitting with that thought until it naturally passes on its own accord. And I would say 99% of the time you will come out at the end of your working day and your car will be there safe. You probably did lock it after all anyway. But often people would like to tolerate that risk and learn to tolerate that risk, because it can be so horrible living with OCD when everything feels like a risk you can't tolerate. Equally, that might feel like too big a jump. And what I would suggest is that people start with small things that they feel they're able to face. You don't have to start with a big intrusion straight away. You might want to start with the smaller stuff. I really like this quote. You don't have to control your thoughts. You just have to stop letting them control you. And it just really stands out for me for OCD as well. You don't have to try and push away your thoughts or act on them. You just have to stop letting those thoughts control you. And the thoughts are still going to be there. We all have intrusive thoughts, like we said. But generally what people find is when we stop acting on them all the time by doing compulsions or trying to push these thoughts away, then they become less noticeable, less powerful, and less frequent over time. Now, that does take time, and if you're struggling with OCD, I do recommend that you speak to your GP about a talking therapy referral, because there are lots of successful therapies out there to help you. CBT is one of them. It's not the only therapy out there to help you, but it does have a good evidence base for helping OCD. Here are some resources that I think are also quite helpful if you're struggling with intrusive thoughts or OCD. So OCD Action is really helpful. There's a really useful website on there, and there is a helpline that you can also call Monday to Friday. Anxiety UK is a good website for all different types of anxiety disorders. I also found this, OCD International. They have, OCD International have an advice for families and friends section. And OCD Action has a friends and family forum. So if you know someone who is struggling with OCD or an intrusive thoughts, then it might be worth having a look yourself, because it's not easy supporting your loved ones, and it can also cause you a lot of worry. So it's important that you also get support. OCD Action is a really good site. It supports lots of different types of OCD. And again, they've got online forums and local support groups that you can find, as well as the helpline. And OCD UK is a charity run by people with OCD for people with OCD. It's well worth checking these things out. There's some really good information and advice on there. I think knowledge really is power, and this is one of my favourite books for OCD. It's called Break Free from OCD. It's quite cheap. You can find it on Amazon. It's by Chalacombe, Bream, Oldfield and Salkowski. I really do recommend that book. It's helped lots of people. If you're on a waiting list for therapy, I recommend that you buy that book and start having a read through it. If you've already started the therapy before you've even seen a therapist, then, that's already put you at a really good start. And there are some other really helpful books on here that I would recommend too. So you've got lots of different resources out there. It. So I've had a very brief run through with you today, looking at intrusive thoughts, what they are. We've touched on a little bit about OCD and compulsions too. I really do recommend for people, if you are struggling with intrusive thoughts, it really is worth seeking talking therapies and help. Any well-trained CBT therapist or other type of mental health professional will have an awareness of intrusive thoughts. Just before we finish, if you are still feeling anxious about sharing your thoughts, I know for a fact that there is a very big difference between somebody who is having thoughts such as stabbing people or sexual thoughts or being a paedophile. These are thoughts people are often quite ashamed about. There's a very big difference between having those thoughts and being anxious about them because it's the last thing you would ever want to happen, which is OCD, compared to people who genuinely are a paedophile or genuinely enjoy violence and want to have those thoughts and want those things to happen. There's a very big difference. And any mental health professional who should be in the field of mental health would understand that and have an awareness of that. Now, I can't say that every single professional is perfect. There are some people who might not have a specific awareness about OCD, but in general, I would say the therapeutic community is very aware of this. And as you saw from the survey, you're not alone with this kind of thinking at all. It's a natural and common part of the human experience. So please do get yourself some support if you are struggling. I would suggest ERP, which is exposure response prevention, or CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Those would be really good ways to start working on your OCD and to seek help in those directions. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found it helpful today.